Hello, mate. How are you going?
Good to see you.
Thanks everyone for coming along. Nice to see some new friends. Tomer, who you should all meet. Cliff Benz, who is a long-time hub member. Gerrit, nice to see you back. IPO for your company next year. That's super exciting. Which stock exchange? Likely? NASDAQ. Very cool. So we have a couple of members, Steve Ringer and Gerrit, whose companies are looking like IPO next year, which is super exciting.
Is there a preferential round for hub people?
That's a very good point. Can we take that offline to the barbecue? Yeah, thanks everyone for coming along. Yeah, we're into the last few weeks. But, you know, there's just always something new to learn. And I guess I just wanted to share some observations and things that I've learned over the last couple of months since we finished off Sprint 3. Some of you will know these things. Hopefully there'll be some new useful tips. And then I'll try to wrap it up with an exercise at the end where we can actually walk away with something useful as an artifact that might be helpful for your stakeholders. So just a quick sort of overview of what I'm going to try to achieve. State of agents, kind of, you know, my sense, at least to the extent that, you know, I'm informed about it, my sense of where things are at. A dive into this concept of skills, which is relatively new. This model of how I'm just going to share some things that I do that might be useful, and it would be lovely to hear how others, if they have any particular workflows that they think are worth sharing. And then we'll wrap it up with an exercise. As always, you can get this presentation. There's some links and things in here that might be useful. QR code, and that's the URL. Yeah, so let me just quickly get a sense of the people in the room. Who's, you know, just looking at all of you, and you're all technical in the sense that you're not just sitting using a desktop AI assistant, but let's start with the desktop AI assistants. Who's using ChatGPT as their primary AI assistant? Who's using Claude as their, who's using both? Anyone using Gemini as their primary? Okay, so quite a mix. And then in terms of sort of power tools, who is using Claude Code as their primary sort of technical platform? Okay, three of you. Who's using Cursor? Okay. Any others? Anyone using Codex?
Replit.
Replit. Okay, so good mix. Yeah, and I mean, at the beginning of this year, it was pretty much everyone was just using the same things, right? Like if we went back to February, it's like who's using ChatGPT? Everyone. Who's using Cursor? Everyone. And now there's just so much more variety and choice, which is awesome. The state of agents, I would say, like, the key thing is, you know, agents, the underlying, it's all about the underlying models, all about the underlying models. And the underlying models have got smarter, and they've become more agentic. So I think that's kind of a key thing that's happened with the models. I'll go into what that sort of means in a second. I think the second thing that's happened with the tooling and the protocols and the standards is that we've been able to this year really see these things start to connect out more easily to different data sources, which from a context engineering perspective, if you remember in the early part of this year, it was a real mission for us to figure out how do you get access to this system, how do you get access to that system to get some useful context. You know, there are a range of things that have happened that have made that easier to do. There's a lot more model competition, particularly from the Chinese AI labs that are, you know, bringing alternatives to the likes of Anthropic and OpenAI and Google. And there are some new context engineering techniques, which I'm going to touch on today, skills being one of them. This is just what this year looks like in terms of model releases, major model releases. Of course, there's hundreds, if not thousands more. But if you just think, just through the space since January, how much progress there's been. OpenAI alone went out with GPT 4.5, 03, 4.1, and then 5 just a couple of months ago, which, you know, I'm using a lot and finding it to be excellent. There was a big kind of, you know, brouhaha about it initially, but it's been very good. And Anthropic too have just kept models coming out now at 4.5 Sonnet, which I think is an excellent coding model. I don't know who's using 4.5 Sonnet for most of their coding. Seems to be very, very good and a lot better than what was already pretty good 3.5 back in August last year.
Next level with tool calling. Insane.
Yeah. And then the other thing I think that's happened is that all of these models have now got much bigger context windows than what they had. Even Sonnet now has a 1 million token context window. GPT-5's at 400K tokens, but 4.1 is at 1 million. Gemini's always been 1 million. So they've got, you know, they're smarter, they've got bigger context windows. And one of the benchmarks that I think is really interesting is this benchmark, which tests long horizon tasks. So you can see here, you know, over the last number of years, the amount of time, the sort of length of tasks that these things can do, which really is a proxy for their ability to make many, many tool calls and interrogate the results of those tool calls. Because there's a lot of work that we need them to do over time that is complex, requires lots of different steps. And you can see here, just over the space of the last year or so, how the latest models, GPT-5 being one example, can now work for, you know, quite a long period of time versus before where it was really just message in, message out, message in, message out. Now they can autonomously run many, many tool calls, hundreds of tool calls, potentially to get to an end state. And then the other, I think, key driver is they've become very, very, very good at coding. So if you look here, this is obviously time on this axis, and you can see when the model launched and what its score is on this human eval benchmark. So this is kind of like the strength of these models in terms of their ability to code. And you can just see as we've sort of gone through time how much better they've got at coding. GPT-5 and so GPT-5 is the black one up there. And I think we've got Sonnet 4.5, the blue one, just over here. So what that's all resulted in is these new autonomous agents. The three major ones being Claude Code, which a number of you are using, Codex, and the cursor agent, and there are many, many more. There's the Replit agent, there's Manus, there's many, 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 many agents that we're all using these days. But the key thing about them is tapping into those model improvements, they're able to just work and work and work, you know, potentially for minutes on end, making a range of different orchestrated tool calls, interrogating the responses, feeding those back in, and getting to an end state. What I've learned recently about the sort of core agentic loop that I hadn't realized was a best practice in Claude. When you look at the Claude Code sort of design, it's a bit that I was missing in my agents that I was building, is an evaluation of the result at the end. So sort of, you know, the tool calling and you know, so if you think about it, we give it the initial job, task, instruction, we give it a bunch of tools, prompts, etc., resources. It goes and does that thing. But what I hadn't put into my agents, which is a key thing that Claude Code has in their design, is that at the end it evaluates whether it's actually achieved the initial instruction or not. And if it hasn't, sort of continues until it does achieve that instruction. So that's a key part of its ability.
How do you address it, like a benchmark or an assignment or a task or something that you know the answer to, or do you?
I think it's mostly in the prompting. Yeah, I think it's mostly in the prompting. It was just something missing from my prompting and my design when I was trying to build these things from scratch. I didn't really have that at the end sort of evaluate whether this output makes sense in the context of the initial instruction. So I think that's just an important step that they are able to do now, and as a result you get much better outputs. Then those coding agents that we just saw there are you know, they were initially developed for coding, and we've been talking almost for this whole year about how do we take these coding agents and make them general purpose knowledge workers. And that's been a lot of the hackery that we've been doing in these sessions is, you know, how do we turn Cursor into a general purpose knowledge worker? And this part of the ecosystem, I think, has evolved a lot this year, the ability to connect out to these various third-party systems. You know, whether it's Claude code through MCP servers or Cursor through, you know, also through MCP servers, codecs, the same. You can now connect those things to literally, you know, almost any third-party SaaS system. And that gives it, I would say, system access to that data. And that's that, you know, that was quite a big step. ChatGPT itself is now pretty fully featured in terms of what you can connect ChatGPT as a non-technical person, where it's really just point and click to connect it via OAuth and MCP servers and connectors to a really large list now of apps and connectors. And more recently, they've allowed for custom MCP servers from within ChatGPT. So you can set up your own remote MCP server, and there's a little button up here called Create, and you can bang in your own remote MCP server or one that you're using that isn't included in their official list. Go through the authentication dance, click a few boxes, and that'll then be added to the list of connectors or MCP servers that you have available in ChatGPT. What's quite handy about that, of course, is increasingly being able to do things on the go. So being able to talk to advanced voice mode, which I'm going to talk a lot about today, on the phone, and have it do a bunch of connecting out to the various systems that you're using in the background, orchestrate those calls, and do stuff that's useful for you. So ChatGPT does that, Claude does that too. Also now has a large number of connectors in their sort of official list. And you can also connect a remote MCP server. I've been doing this in the last week or so. Built my first remote MCP server. I've always had ones that run on my computer, but remote MCP was a bit trickier, hosting on Railway. One thing that I quite like that Claude has done over ChatGPT is it's got pretty good controls in terms of being able to give your MCP server access to network and so forth for making calls and things without popping up like permission things every single time, which it does on ChatGPT. So anyway, that's Claude. And then I think the other thing that's happened, and I remember Ryan Griffin's talk earlier this year, you know, his prediction was that the major SaaS platforms that we use will also integrate AI and will sort of become very horizontal in what they do. That is certainly happening. I paid a visit to Notion, which I haven't done for a couple of months, and you know, their AI product or their AI features have improved a hell of a lot. We had a talk from Nina last week, and she talked about the heart of our companies being the place that we store knowledge and the importance of that. And she talked about an Atlassian product called Rovo, which is sort of one of these products that is connecting out to all of your different systems and then giving you really a central chat interface into all of those data sources with the agentic capabilities that you would expect. Notion now has that where you can connect out from Notion to a whole range of third-party services that you use. The pricing, you know, it's a per seat pricing with Notion, which I'm not wild about, but pretty powerful now. This ability to orchestrate data from all of those different sources. And I think what that's taking us to is, I thought for a while there that we're going to have to get yet another piece of software that was going to, or we're going to have to migrate all of our data from this system or this system to this kind of new thing. Luckily, that's not happening. So, you know, we can keep our data relatively messy in Google Drive or wherever it is, and these aggregation points are going to do the hard work of bringing that together. That's Notion. There's one called Glean, similar, and Rovo, which Nina took us through last week, which are sort of emerging as these new sort of agentic interfaces into your company data. I need to spend a bit more time playing with this over the summer. But the one thing that hasn't changed with all of this is that the tokens are expensive. Like every day you're reading about SAM and, you know, $1 trillion compute and so on, and the need for compute and energy and trillions of dollars of investment. AI is not getting any cheaper. It's still very, very expensive. So there's some more advanced techniques that have sort of started to evolve over the last couple of months which deal with how to make more intelligent design choices about context and context engineering. I mean, those of us that are using Cursor or Claude or whatever, we all know, like, the occupational hazard these days is running out of credits, you know, needing to upgrade to the even more expensive plan and so forth. And that's because you just churn through those credits. One of the reasons you do churn through those credits is that the MCP approach that we've had up until now is a pretty blunt instrument in the sense that if you toggle on these MCP servers, the same Cursor, if you use the Superbase MCP, the browser MCP, and others here, the Superbase MCP alone has 29 tools. So once you switch that on, that's 29 tools and tool descriptions, which are pretty comprehensive, that get included, pre-appended to every single message that you send to Cursor. And if you have multiple of these tools, it just uses up a significant amount of tokens every single time that you send those messages. And that's one of the reasons that you pretty quickly run out of your credits. So there's sort of an evolving way of dealing with this. This is a little bit technical, but and I won't go into detail, but the best practice now for MCP servers is rather than having 29 tools, Superbase would really have one tool that would let it would sort of summarize the fact that, you know, this is one tool, but it's a pointer to 29 other tools, and you can, on an as-needs basis, get the information for those other tools, which is basically what we call progressive disclosure. So rather than saying, here's 29 tools and here's all the information about them, it would say, you know, Superbase, this is a Superbase tool that allows you to do pretty much anything with Superbase, including blah, blah, and blah, categories of tools, you know, read, write, create tables, etc. And if you want more information about them, you can call a tool that will then list them out for you. And then that way, because these models, like I just explained, are more agentic and smarter, they themselves can be inquisitive and figure out with one call, these are all the things that are available to me. Let me look at that group of tools. Okay, now I found the one that I need. So rather than banging all of those tokens into every single message, you progressively disclose that information. So that's this notion of progressive disclosure. And I thought I'd just spend 2 minutes on this because this is now sort of making its way into how we do our prompt engineering. If you think of prompts at the beginning of this year, we created these massive big files that had all this information in a single Markdown file. Now the idea is basically that you have a pointer file. So this initial file might just have a series of categories with pointers to other files in your file system or even online, where you say, you know, if I think about the hub, rather than putting everything about facilities, memberships, you know, all in one big file, I would say, if you want information about facilities, look at the facilities file. If you want information about memberships, look at the memberships file, and so on. And the agent will use its read file tool. You know, it'll read this one. It'll go, okay, he's asked me something about memberships. It'll then read the memberships file. And if I've got a hell of a lot of information, I might have a third level of disclosure. Does that make sense? So you sort of, you know, you're really just creating this progressive disclosure rather than putting all of that information in a single file that gets used or gets included whether you need it or not. This is just a small example here. So this is like a project management assistant prompt. And you can see here for sprint planning queries, load that Markdown file. For resource questions, load this one here. So this is just an example of like a pointer file that then points to the more detailed underlying files. And the agent can kind of figure out which one of these things is relevant, go and read that file, and then it's got what it needs in context to go and do its job. So then we have this this new concept of agent skills, we sort of build on this. So rather than, you know, putting all these MCP servers in, banging all that stuff into context, we have the idea of agent skills. The way I thought about agent skills this morning is MCP servers are great. We've given these things access to the systems, but it would be like bringing on a new employee and giving them a login into a range of different systems. Great, they've got to log into those systems, but do they have skills that teach them how to use those systems and how we as a company or organization use those systems? No, they don't. So you can think of skills as not just a way of doing this progressive disclosure and more efficient token management, but it actually is a step towards how do we actually encompass our standard operating procedures, some of the nuances about how we work and what we do into a prompt framework, so that we not only provide access to the data, but we explain how the data should be used. So if we're going to get these agents to do work for us, we want them to do work for us in a way that they have the skills that we have or that we would otherwise train another human to have to do effective things. So the best way to probably show this is just take you through a couple of skill examples. So credit goes to Anthropic here for this concept. I mean, it's actually very basic. There's nothing really to it. But it's just recognizing that the models are now good enough to be able to kind of figure out, if you give it a directory and you say there's some useful things in here, the model is smart enough to like inspect the directory and figure out, you know, which of those things are going to be useful for it. So let's have a little look here. This is the Anthropic, the official skills that they launched when they announced skills. And I thought a useful one to look at would be this internal comms skill. So let's go and look at the anatomy of a skill. The de minimis requirement is a skill.md file. And if we go to the code here, you'll see what this Markdown file is. So it has a name, internal comms. The name should be succinct but descriptive. And then you can see here the description is very succinct, very short, but sort of provides a little summary of the more detailed information that's going to be included in the full skill. So you can see here a set of resources to help me write all kinds of internal comms. Remember, this is a generic internal comms skill. This isn't one I've tailored to, say, the Digital Hub comms or Council comms. Claude should use this skill whenever asked to write some sort of internal communications, leadership updates, 3P updates, company newsletters, etc., etc. When to use the skill. So this is sort of an instruction as to, you know, in which cases you would actually apply the skill, and then the how to. You can see here the progressive disclosure. So identify the type and then load the appropriate guideline file. So in the examples, we have, you know, a company newsletter example, an FAQ answers, general comms, etc. So very basic, this particular one, and the way the model behaves, or the agent behaves, is that the name and the description gets loaded in as a so rather than, you know how I said MCP servers load everything when you switch those MCP servers on, what gets loaded is basically anything in the skills folder. So here, let's just say this is the skills folder. It basically iterates through the frameworks iterate through the skills folder and grabs from each of the skills the name and the description, and there's a little array of those things. So that's what's getting included when you use skills in Claude or when you use skills in Cursor via, you know, a little MCP server, or however you use it. The best practice is basically that you include the names and descriptions, and that is sufficient for the agent to then go, he's just asked me to help him write a press release. I remember that we have an internal comms, or we have a comms skill. I'm going to go and invoke that skill. And when it invokes a skill, that basically means it reads this file, the skill.md file. And the skill.md file could point to an arbitrary number of other files. It could also, as I'll show you here, for the document skills, not only point to, so here's the skill.md file, which you can see is more detailed, but also in this one, you'll see we have scripts. So in here we have scripts and we have templates. So you could load in the doc, working with doc files or Word doc files. You could load in here your specific company templates and so forth. And what the scripts are scripts for working with the Python libraries that work with Word files or work with Excel files or work with PDF files or whatever it might be. So you can see here that it can just use this script. It doesn't need to write this code. It will read the code normally, and then it'll basically just call this script and pass whatever parameters it needs to. So a skill can include scripts, a skill can include examples, templates, etc., etc. So it's very flexible. It's basically just directory of resources, and the skill.md file is the sort of starting point for the agent to explore what that skill is. And you can assume that it's loading. If you use skills in Claude or Cursor or whatever, if you use them properly, it's going to load the name and the description so the agent is always going to know what skills it has available. All right. I think there's kind of like this emerging thing, which is going to be getting very good at writing and creating these skills. So writing them for your own company, it might be standard operating procedures, the way you like to write documents, reports, etc., etc. So I've started sort of porting a lot of the sub-agents and things that I've written this year to skills, because, you know, what's quite nice is you can just zip up one of these skill directories and they're transferable from this agent to that agent to that agent. Any questions about skills? Yeah.
So I just use Cursor. I've had a go at Claude, but I just prefer Cursor for my workflow. Now, if I'm implementing skills instead of MCPs, I thought MCPs were essentially hard-coded into the Cursor agent, right? So regardless of what folders I've got, if I'm calling an agent, isn't it always calling MCPs anyway?
No. So in Cursor, the way it works is that you define your MCP servers at either the global level or at the project level. The place to see that is in your settings, of course. If you go to settings, Cursor settings, tools and MCP servers. This full list of MCP servers here is populated from a combination of my mcp.json file here. So you can see this is my list of JSON files, but it will also have the ones at the global level. So, but in the settings, I sort of determine which of those things I actually want switched on or switched off. So you can see here, in this particular repo, I only have this one switched off. I've created an MCP server that effectively extends Cursor to be able to use the skills thing that Claude Code and the other ones use. So the only one I'm using in here is Cursor skills, and you can see the 4 tools I have: list skills, invoke skill, import skill, find skill. So when I start a new chat here, the only MCP information that is being included in that chat are the tool descriptions from those ones that are switched on there. No other ones are switched on.
Yeah.
So only if it's toggled on here will it be included in that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah.
So just on what you've got there with the Cursor skills.
Yeah.
The way that MCP works, is that looking, do you given access to the local file system where that code base is? Just reads and writes.
Yeah, I have. So I'll just quickly show you here. So so I've just created this little, I've got a skills folder, and I've basically just imported a bunch of skills that I found, the ones that Anthropic released and others have released, just put them in the skills folder, and then I made a little MCP, very simple MCP server that, let me see if I can find it here. Probably better to show you in my Cursor skills, this Cursor skills repo, which is up on my GitHub if you want to see it, And the way the MCP server works is very simple. You can see cursor skills, a little instruction, and then the tools are basically these tools. List the skills, which just simply lists the skills in the skills directory, getting the name and description for each one. Invoke a skill, which means it's going to read the skills.md file for a given skill. And then I just added a couple of nice to haves, like, give it a GitHub URL, import the skill automatically for you. But just to quickly demonstrate how that works, let me just make sure I've got it switched on in this repo. Okay, so if I say, let's just see which skills I've got in here. Well, I can just ask it, what skills do you have? What it should do is it should call list skills. There we go, ran list skills, and that'll tell me what skills it has. And it's really just listing the skills that I have in that particular thing. Yeah, and one thing that's quite nice is that Anthropic actually created as part of the skills a skill building skill. So I've been using this a fair bit to port some of my stuff across to skills. So I'll say to it, please analyze, I did this just yesterday. We use a billing system at the hub called Cobot. It's got an API, very complex, sort of detailed API. And what I could say to it was, I want you to go and analyze the API documentation and make a skill for me for using that API. And it went, analyze the documentation. I did say to it, I'm only really interested in reporting, finances, invoicing, and stuff like that. There's hundreds of different endpoints. Read the documentation and created this skill for me, to the point now where I can say, what members' names, surnames start with D. And you'll see what it does. It knows that it has this Cobot skill. It's invoked the skill, so it's read. Now you can see it says now I've the Cobot API skill loaded to find members whose surnames start with D. First, I've got to get that, then I've got to do that. It's got all this information. So I'm going to say you have all of that. At least I think it has all of that. I'm going to do it from this other one here, where I know this is a demo fail, but basically it's loaded up that skill. It's asking me for some information. It does actually have that. I've just got to update my skill file to say, you know what the OAuth token is, and then it'll write the code, make the API calls. In fact, it's got a couple of little scripts, I think, that it wrote for itself here. No, it didn't. Oh yeah, it does. OAuth helper. So it's written a script here to help with authentication, and then it's written this revenue report little script. Anyway, it's an example of one where I've pointed at the API documentation, it's made a skill, and now that it's got that skill, which I sort of collaborated with it on, I can now ask it to do all sorts of things with respect to that billing system that, I otherwise would be just going and using the UI and getting sort of unsatisfactory results from. So yeah, that's skills.
You could still use, because that little tool that you created, which is the MCP, you could use that MCP to add skills to any framework.
Yes.
So you could use that to add skills to Pydantic or something.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very open-ended in terms of what you can do with it. Cursor doesn't ship with skill support, but just with the use of an MCP server, and you don't even really need to do that. You could just simply say, in my rules here, you'll see in my cursor rules, I have a rule here where I've said you have this repo transforms you into a general purpose agent by giving you access to specialized skills. This enables you to do other kinds of work, of knowledge work for the user. You're either an orchestrator where you use skills, or you're a pair programmer, which is the default that Cursor sort of ships with. So just with that rule, which gets included every single time, you can see it's an always apply rule. It knows that if I ask it to do something, it shouldn't use its general knowledge, it should rather use the specific skill that it has available. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Alright, so that's this concept of agent skills, and I predict that's in the same way prompt engineering was, this all fits into context engineering. Prompt engineering was a skill a year ago. This ability to develop skills for people or for companies or for organizations, I think is going to become quite valuable, because it's not just about access to the system. It's like, okay, how do we use the system? How do we write the report? How do you like the report written? What are the SOPs and how do you want them followed? That's really where I think skills will start to shine. That's just a repetition of what I showed earlier.
And Chris,
Showed some
can you
skills.
just explain the difference between, say, building out your rules versus skills?
I think in some ways what we're doing is we're giving the agent the benefit of the doubt that it's quite smart, and that it'll, if you just give it access to sort of a range of resources without being super prescriptive about saying you have to do this, then you have to do that, then you have to do the next thing. You give it the skill that says, we could look at it again, but if you go and you have a look at those skills, you can really see that we've moved to a point where we're giving the AI the benefit of the doubt that it's really smart, and it'll figure out which of these things is the right thing to do. So rather than previously, we would have created mermaid diagrams saying you must do this, then you must do this, then you must do this, then you must do this. You can really just describe that in quite succinct terms, and the AI will be smart enough to go, okay, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do the next thing. Yeah. So that's skills. I gave a little demo of it. Let me just quickly show you how within Claude, if you're using Claude, how you can use that. So you find skills. Under your settings, here, settings, and you'll see there's this new thing called capabilities, and capabilities have skills here, and it ships with a bunch of default ones, some of which are very cool. Let me quickly show you one. Let's turn on the algorithmic art. I'll just do this in the background while we keep going. I'm going to say, what we should see it do is we should see it go, okay, what skills do I have? It's thinking about it. Let's see how it tackles this problem. It should see that it's got an algorithmic skills skill. It knows through my custom instructions in Claude who I am, the hub, etc. So you can see it's going using its fetch tool to go to the website address that I gave it. And then what it should do is it should come back and go, it's going to start using the algorithmic skill, the algorithmic art skill. So at the moment it's browsing around.
Americans never thought that some domains have an extra dot in it. It would have been PeregianHub.com if they'd thought that through.
So now, you see what it says there? Reading the algorithmic art skill to understand best practices for creating generative art. So it's going to read skill.md, which we can have a quick look at. So if we go back to the Anthropic skills here, we go back to skills, and we look at the Anthropic, the algorithmic art, and we go to this skill, and we read this. You can see it says, creating algorithmic art using P5. P5.js is a little JavaScript library that is for visualizations. And then actually this is a fantastic prompt. It sort of starts with think of the philosophy of the art that you're going to create, and has these sort of different philosophical models to think about. it's really, whoever did this did it really nicely. Anyway, we won't go through it in detail, but there's like a whole process, examples, technical requirements, etc., telling it what it should go and do. And it will chug away on that, writing this code. You can see it's doing this step where it's absorbed the site's coastal tech aesthetic, that's the website, understanding the skill requirements. The hub sits between ocean and ambition, a place where natural rhythms meet computational thinking. I'll create something that feels like both the coastal environment and the emergent element of the tech ecosystem. So you can see this is the philosophy.md file that it's creating, where it sort of writes out the philosophy, and then the philosophy gets then used in a second step to then go and create the art. Okay, so here's our here is our little artwork that's been generated, and I can share that, publish that artifact, copy the link. You can see it's chosen these colors which it learned from our website, and you can change all these values. Bit of fun. Here are some resources, some good blog posts to learn about skills and their strengths and weaknesses. And then I've pulled together a series of resources here that aggregate skills that have been shared by various individuals and organizations. The nice thing is these are very, very transferable. You can basically just zip up a skill that you find and dump it in your skills folder, and your AI can start using it immediately. I like taking some of them and then starting to iterate on them. So say the internal comms one, it's generic for internal comms, but it's not that difficult to then give it a bunch of examples of your writing. Might be press releases, might be internal memos that you've sent, etc. And you ask it to make some adjustments to the generic skill, to customize it to the skill that's based on your writing, your brand, your voice, etc. Similarly, there are very handy starting points for skills around brand guidelines. So rather than starting a brand guidelines thing from absolute scratch, you go with this skill because, very good prompt engineers have sort of created these scaffolds. So you would go to this, you would give it your brand guidelines and say, please create an equivalent or customize this skill with our brand guidelines. So I've linked to a bunch of other skill repositories you can go and have a look at. One thing I find a little bit frustrating about skills when you use them in the context of ChatGPT and the other sort of assistants, online assistants, is that a really powerful skill is able to sort of connect out to third-party APIs across the internet, and mostly those assistants don't allow for network access. So that's a little bit frustrating, but it's not true if you use those skills in Cursor, Claude Code, any of the coding agents. You don't have that limitation. But if you use them in ChatGPT, etc., at the moment at least, they're quite limited in terms of being able to call out. So if you said, I want you to go and call my Superbase API and get a bunch of information, bring it back, and then use the skill, within the skill, it's not able to do that. Okay, I think I've shown you that. I wanted to just, particularly for those that are not necessarily, haven't really embedded all the capabilities and are not like super nerds on AI, I wanted to just share where my current kind of like AI usage is at and the tools that I'm using, and just show you a couple of things that might be useful to you. We're a couple of years into this and I still can't go past Google's AI Studio for working with big documents and reports. It's free and I highly, highly recommend it. Let me give you an example. So I have to, from time to time, write reports because the hub is part of a Noosa Council. It is a Noosa Council facility. I've got a big report I've got to issue this week and go and meet the council and present it to them and so on. It's a big job. And I have, over the last 2 years, cultivated this little I would call it an agent. You can see what I've loaded it up with here. This isn't confidential because this information is publicly available. The Noosa corporate plan, and you see what I've done in each instance. I've said, given it a little bit of context and then given it a big PDF document, 35,000 tokens. Here's the operational plan. Here's our digital hub document, which talks everything you need to know about the hub. Here's the last sort of ROI report that we produced on the hub. In this particular instance, I was working on a grant application. Here's the grant information. Here's the form that we need to fill out. Just a bunch of documents, and each time just a little bit of context, which tells it what's happening with that particular document, and then I'm starting to chat with it. And the thing about AI Studio and Gemini, as you can see, this is like a very long conversation with a lot of tokens generated. But the thing about this that's different to almost all the other models is that it is taking the full content of all of those documents. It's not just searching and getting bits and pieces from them each time you ask them a question. It's taking the full content of all of those documents. And now when I talk to it, it's got everything that I could possibly need for it to answer my questions on that particular topic. So I highly recommend this. And then what I do is, so let's say I load it up with a bunch of that valuable context in the beginning, but I need to use it for different projects. I don't want to keep chatting down the bottom, but I also don't want to delete my messages. What you do is this. You go here to the most recent message and you say branch from here. And what that'll do is the conversation up to that point gets cloned and you can start from that point. So rather than destroying what you have here, removing things, deleting the conversation and going back, it'll just duplicate that entire conversation to that point. You don't have to re-upload the documents or anything. I'll show you. So if I click branch from here, it's going to give me the starting point of a new chat where it automatically loads in those previous things and I can just start chatting with it from there. So this is a really useful way of creating like one place where you have all of those documents, and for a lot of the work that you're going to do, all you really need to do is create a new branch, add some new documents, chat with it there, and each time just branch. Cliff?
How do you think that sort of differs from, say, ChatGPT projects where you can do the similar thing to branching?
Yeah, there's a subtle but important difference between them. ChatGPT projects and Claude projects and so forth use a technique called RAG. And what RAG is effectively search. So if I were to ask ChatGPT, let's say I did the same thing with projects. I loaded it up with 5 big PDFs. These things they're large, 33,000 tokens. That's like a 25-page, 40-page PDF. If you put that into projects, what happens is in Gemini, because it's 1 million tokens, it basically uses all of that content. Imagine if you copied and pasted all of that content into a massive prompt. It's like just one huge prompt, and all of that information got pasted into the prompt. That's the way this works. Whereas if you did it in projects, either Claude or ChatGPT, and you asked a question, what it's going to do is it's going to go and run a search against the documents to find relevant bits that it's going to pull out and use those bits that it pulls out to answer your question. It's a subtle difference because here there's a nuance in actually like reading all of this information to then give you an answer at the end. I'm not relying on it to go and find bits that it thinks might be relevant. Here it's got to read everything, every single word of that document, of all the documents I've given it to come out the other end. The nice thing is this isn't an either, this is an and. So this is a tool that you use in particular where, like the example I'm giving you here, I needed to have read end to end all of those documents in detail for it to be able to help me and answer my questions at the bottom. It's a very, very useful tool.
So Chris, can you change documents and further up the branch? It'll affect all the...
You used to be able to do that, and I don't think you can do that anymore. I think all you can do is delete, and you can't reorder them. You used to be able to reorder them, which is a little bit of a pain. But it's not that difficult to just go, okay, well, I'm going to branch from here, add a few more documents. The order of them isn't that important. But I do find it's useful to just provide a little bit of text that contextualizes what this document is and why we're putting it in there. So use this. This is a great tool.
Sorry, can you share that with team?
You can.
With team members?
Yeah, you can. you can share it and it'll go across with those documents. So I've built quite a few of these for colleagues and so forth.
So sorry, when you share it, it then becomes theirs?
They basically get a clone of it.
Okay.
Yeah, they can save it to Drive. All of these notebooks, Google AI Studio notebooks, are saved to your Google Drive. So so that's that. I think that's a very useful thing. Even to this day, I use this a lot. The next one is Grok on X. I do a lot of my AI learning on X. I create lists of people in different categories. In this particular category, it's people that are working in AI. I need to keep up to speed with what's going on. I'll see something, I won't fully understand it. I'll just be able to hit this little button and say, please explain the significance. And the Grok AI is very powerful in that it can watch videos, it can look at the images. So if it was a video post, it can watch the video. It reads the subsequent comments and so forth. So it gives you very, very good answers if you're using this as a learning system. And then, I've now got like a whole bunch of useful context here that I can take away and use in some research I'm doing, or if I want to present some knowledge to someone, or I've now learned something. So that's very handy, is that's on every single post here, and it's free. So I'm just using the free, I don't have a paid Grok subscription, but it's in line on every single post. So if you see something that you want explained, that's just a good technique as well. Despite the fact that ChatGPT and Claude have web search, I still find myself using Perplexity often. In fact, for these slides, I'll show you a couple of instances where I used it. So I gave it quite a, you can see my conversation with it here. Please show me a chart of LLM model improvement in 2025. Now, that's not just a search, right? That's an agentic task that I've given it, because it's actually going to go, it's going to do a bunch of searches, and then it's going to produce an artifact that I can use. In this case, a table. And in this case, yes, this was the table one that I used in the presentation. And here you can see my initial show a chart of LLM models improving at coding. You can see it's gone and done a bunch of searches, including finding images. And I followed it up here. It gave me a table. I need a graph. And here it's actually written code. It's used its code interpreter tool. It's produced this chart. I wasn't quite happy with the chart. It doesn't include GPT-5 or the latest Sonnet. Gone, done some more work. Did this for me, and it was so it gave me this one. I said, I think we could have more granularity on the time axis. Quarters would be good, so you can plot those releases to the nearest quarter. Boom, it's written a bunch of code with the underlying data and given me this. Download, drag, drop. So very, very handy as yet another team member working for you, that you can go and get this kind of stuff done. Connected to the net, very good at searching and finding data. So that's Perplexity. You're going to have 20 tabs open. You're going to use these agents. They're going to be working for you all the time. Sorry, I lost my place there. Let's go back to here. OpenRouter, which I've always evangelized to you guys, and is very, very handy for model benchmarking. So if you're not quite sure which model you want to use for a given task, OpenRouter has this fantastic and handy little chat room where you can add models in here. So I might want to check how GPT-5 is going to perform against, say, Claude, Sonnet 4.5, or Opus, or whatever it might be. And you get the idea. I could add n number of models, submit a query here, and I'll be able to then see. So it sends the message to all of them. They all respond, and then I can kind of read their responses and see which responses I like better to figure out which model do I want to use for this particular task. So that's handy. I use Claude for important writing tasks. So here, just to quickly show, I was working on my report, pasted the whole report. I'm not happy with the exec summary, doesn't cover the full breadth, it's too narrow, please rewrite. Read my full report, rewrote the exec sum for me, copy, paste back into my document. And Cursor for orchestrating complex workflows. I still think that's a power tool, Claude Code and Cursor, still my preferred way of working. I keep a lookout on GitHub for new skills, so that's very simple. You just type in here Claude skills in GitHub, sort by recently updated, and every now and then, every couple of days, I'll just go through this and see, has someone, this is more for inspiration than anything, UX writing skill. Someone's made a UX writing skill, that could be interesting. I'll read the skill MD and see what it's all about and whether it could be useful for me or not. So that's just another handy thing you can do. And then I've been, has anyone had a crack at these browser agents, the new agentic browsers, Comet, Deer, and ChatGPT Atlas? I found a use case because I was struggling to find a use case where I would really use it, and I found a use case and it was quite valuable. So here's my use case. I'm working on a Google document, and I had a series of tables, and I wanted to add a column to the table, and add some commentary in an additional column in this table. And I could have, of course, copied and pasted stuff between ChatGPT. It would have been quite laborious to get it back into a tabular format and, fiddle around with the tables. What I was able to do here using ChatGPT Atlas, which if you have a paid ChatGPT subscription is free and connects to your ChatGPT account, is use the agent. And what it actually did was it went into the document just like a human would go in. Of course, it's GPT-5. It's very, very smart. It can read, once I gave it my, what I asked it to do, which I'll show you my learning process here. So I gave it the document, add a new column to the tables called method, describe the method by which we would collect the data point in the surveys, ... It immediately just answered me in line, which is not what I wanted, because then I'd have to go and copy and paste in here. And my experiment was to see if I could get it to actually edit the document directly. And what I was not doing correctly was getting it into agent mode. So you can see here this toggled on agent, which means it can now actually work in the browser. So I said to it, I can see you're not actually working in the document. It said, I can't directly click. Would you like me to use your browser to update the Google Doc with a new version? It includes this. If you click continue on the next prompt. So then popped up this thing saying, effectively, let the agent take control of the browser and work in the browser. And it did it, and did it really, really well. Like, figured out how to add a column, correct fonts, and then read these things and put the correct answers in there. So that was really powerful. That saved quite a lot of time. So rather than copy and paste, I would have got ChatGPT to do the method anyway, but I would have been copying and pasting and mucking around. That's the first good use case I found. If Chris Owens was here and Steve were here, they might have a couple of others. But yeah, share if you find good use cases for these things. I'm interested to know. I'm interested to know what they are. And then finally, I wanted to share a couple of tips. I always have to share this tip. For those of you that are working in Google Docs, there's a very, very important feature that I want you to learn how to unlock. Tools, preferences, and this by default is checked off, enable Markdown. Markdown is the format that LLMs talk to us in. So whenever you go and you're having a chat with ChatGPT or Claude, let's just take this example here, and I go and copy this. It's probably not a good example because there's not a lot of formatting here, and I paste this into my document. You can see raw Markdown pasted like this. The formatting isn't preserved. This is a heading 2. You can tell by the 2 little stars there. So if you've toggled on that feature, you can say edit, paste from Markdown, and it's going to retain all the formatting, including tables and other things that you got from your LLM response. So more complex ones that might have, let's just go to that Perplexity example. If I were to copy this, I would want it to paste in with the correct formatting, tables and so forth. So that's the one way. But then also what I want to be able to do is if I'm writing a Google Doc from scratch, let's say, and I've got a lot of formatting and I've got tables. If I were to just copy that content, so let me just show you. I'm gonna go to a new ChatGPT session and I paste it in there. It loses all of the formatting that I had particularly in tables. Tabular information encodes a lot of nuanced columns and rows, a lot of nuance, and you lose it here because they all just get pasted as new lines. So what you do is, you go here, now that we've enabled this, we can select all, and go edit, copy as Markdown, okay? And if we copy it as Markdown, and we go and paste it in here, you'll see that it's retained the tables. Okay, so paste them in as a Markdown table. So that's a really, really important power tip when moving information between LLMs and Google Docs. And of course, work in Google Docs and you can always turn those into Word docs. So that's a really important tip I wanted to share.
That tip, Chris, has probably unlocked more productivity using AI than anything else that I've done, because most of my output is docs.
Yeah, I can't emphasize that one enough. That's a really, really valuable one. And in this document, if you want to learn how to use Markdown, it's a very simple little language. We've got this little Markdown teacher on the hub. Just to quickly show you, you can see it's very simple. That is a heading 1, that's a heading 2. And there's a whole range of different formatting things that you can learn here. How to do lists, bulleted lists, how to do tables, and so forth. So learning Markdown is a valuable little language to learn, and it helps with stuff like this when you're working with LLMs. Branching, I showed you that in what's his name, in Gemini, but let me also show you how you do that in ChatGPT. It's not well known that you can do this in ChatGPT, but you certainly can. So let's say you've had this whole long conversation. What you can do here is you can go on the ... menu and you can branch in a new chat. So let's say you've had this whole long conversation, you've given it a whole bunch of useful context, it's given you some answers, but now you want to go and you don't want to lose all of that, but you want to take the conversation in a different direction. You just click on branch in new chat, and now it's going to effectively clone that for me, and I can just keep chatting, continue that conversation, but not lose the original conversation. So that's very handy.
Cursor has the same thing.
Yeah, Cursor has the same thing. It's brilliant in Cursor because you might have a very long, long sort of conversation here. Click on the ... duplicate chat. You might have given it a bunch of different context. It's built a whole bunch of features for you. Then you've asked it a series of questions. You don't want those to, you want to start a new chat but not lose this. You just duplicate the chat. Okay. Google, I'm impressed that they've moved so fast. LLM improvements in 2025. Okay, here's a typical Google search. And look at this little thing. We all know about this one, but look at this now. AI mode. Effectively, you're now one click away from a ChatGPT experience in Google. I'm impressed with the way that they've done that. But just so everyone knows, you now have a very powerful, free AI capability within Google there, which is one click away from a search result. So if you've done it, if you've started with search, to then just click on AI mode and continue a conversation is very powerful as well.
The results are really fast as well. Like you do a Google search and it's just like instant.
Yeah. Yeah, so have a play with that. That's another awesome thing. Again, it's not either or. This is just and. You're going to use all of these things. This is going to be a standard part of all the software that you use. Okay, now I don't want to just talk for an hour and a half. I did want to do a little exercise, and I think the other stuff you guys will know. I'll just quickly go to deep research. Deep research is an unbelievably underutilized tool that you should be using just on principle every day. Just click on this, go to deep research and ask it a big hairy question, something to do about your organization, your market, things that you're interested in, and just set it off for 15 minutes to go and research that in depth for you. So useful and so valuable. And you get, N number of deep research allotments each month, and most people don't use them. So you should really, really use that. I use it a lot. And it produces new artifacts, new documents that I can then add to my knowledge base. Might be a market research piece, it might be whatever. I highly recommend using that. Complex search is what I showed you with Perplexity. But now let's do the exercise. Okay, the thing that I have found incredibly valuable in recent times, and I'm advocating that we all use it a lot, is the advanced voice on ChatGPT. Who has used advanced voice on ChatGPT on the mobile app? Okay, we all know that it's really, really powerful. But how you use it, I think there's some nuance to this, and I would love to hear how other people are doing it. But I had 2 over the last month or so that were so powerful. So I just went on a holiday to South Africa, and I am at that stage of my life where my memory is not very good. I loaded up itinerary, flight information, car hire, car insurance, a spreadsheet I kept of all the things we were supposed to be doing into a project in ChatGPT. And whenever I had an internet connection, I would just hit the advanced voice and talk to it literally like my travel agent. What are we doing today? Where do I need to be? What time is the connecting flight? What terminal do I need to be at, etc. It was unbelievably helpful and useful. And coming out of that, I'm like, I've got to use this more when I get back to work. So I had a couple of things this week I wanted to share with you that I think are very useful patterns. So let's say you've got a big job that you have to do, and it's one of those jobs you're just procrastinating. It's a document you have to put together, a report or something like that. Massively painful. A good starting point is just the skeleton of that document, right? Just the headings that you want to do. You give it to ChatGPT and you say, read the document, and I want you for each section to be curious and come up with prompts that you would ask me questions that I can just off the top of my head answer, and we're going to fill out the document that way. So you load that on the desktop, you start that conversation, and then you go for a walk, go for a drive, whatever you like to do, get in the shower, and now it's asking you the questions from that document, and you are just answering it off the top of your head, responding to it via voice. Has anyone not seen ChatGPT voice or used it before? I mean, unbelievably powerful. So that's the first one, is you load in a document. Of course, this works with projects too, so it's, like I just explained, very powerful if you've loaded context into a project. But this thing of quickly throw something into it, a starting point of a document or a report or something like that, and then do that on your desktop and then go off for a walk and continue the conversation on your mobile using advanced voice is a very powerful pattern. And then I had a meeting last week with someone. It was one of these sort of like brainstormy type meetings, a little bit speculative. You know that it's one of those meetings where 99 times out of 100, it's a time waster. And it's a time waster because the opportunities and ideas discussed in that meeting get washed up on the rocks of follow-up. No one follows up. There's notes to be taken. Someone's got to write up a 2-pager, etc., etc., etc. It's just, we just waste so many of those kinds of conversations. So what I did in that one was right at the beginning of the meeting, or actually I lied, it was towards the end of the meeting, I realized we discussed a bunch of stuff. There was going to be follow-up needed. I sure as hell didn't want to do the follow-up. And that we were talking but not capturing some quite good ideas that were being discussed. So I fired up advanced voice, and the technique was this. It was a 2-person meeting. We were just standing in the thing. I said to ChatGPT, who knows me because of my custom instructions and what I do and so forth, I said, hey, listen, need your help. We're having a conversation here. I want to capture this, and I want you to help us with the follow-ups. And I sort of handed over to my colleague and said, can you just introduce yourself quickly? I introduced I just said, this is me, you know who I am. We're talking about this. And then we basically summarized the whole meeting that we just had. I riffed and said a bunch of things. She riffed and said a bunch of things that we discussed. And we just dumped. Every now and then stopping to say, did you get that? Yes, I got that. It would play it back to us. Yes, I got that. Play it back to us, just very briefly. But then the most important part at the end, in the last 5 minutes of the meeting, it was, okay, let's use the last 5 minutes of the meeting to produce the follow-up artifacts. Don't leave that for some subsequent thing that you'll come back to later. Actually use the last 5 minutes. get the AI to do that. So it was like, okay, we want you to produce a 3-pager, which takes what you, what you've learned in this conversation where we've given you this knowledge dump, and we want you to create an elevator pitch so that my colleague can call her colleague and pitch this idea to her. So it was sort of rethinking the meeting and rethinking the role of the AI. In that instance, that's one pattern. The other pattern is you actually have it contribute to the meeting. It's got enough context that it can contribute to the meeting. You throw a question across to it. Hey, what do you think? Do you think this is a good idea? Can you think of anything else we should be considering? Boom, the thing is like very, very smart and it's got context now. It will say to you, have you considered this? Have you considered that? So anyway, I thought a fun way to end the session. We get into the end of the year. Everyone's going to want to be able to say to their stakeholders, colleagues, friends, etc., this is what we achieved in 2025. So I thought what we could do is break up into pairs. Hopefully, one of the pair will have ChatGPT paid app on their phone with advanced voice.
What's advanced mean? Is it just normal voice? Is there a special
No,
name?
there's a difference between advanced voice and voice. Normal voice is really just dictation. Advanced voice is
Is it special?
so let me show you. It's just the black button. It's in the paid ChatGPT. It's just this one, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But note the microphone next to it is
Yes.
dictation,
Okay.
where you can literally hit that. So this one, just so everyone can see, this little microphone in ChatGPT is effectively speech to text. You can click that on and you could talk for a long, long time and it'll capture all of that incredibly, incredibly accurately, but it's not a two-way conversation. Once you go into this, it's effectively hands-free ChatGPT usage. Okay, so I think for the last 17 minutes, let's see if we can achieve this, break into pairs, and your job is to sort of help each other, by asking each other questions, produce a sort of end of year, here's what I've achieved, or maybe here's what I've learned about AI, or here's what I've done this year. So that you have, you learn to use the AI to kind of like participate in that conversation, capture it, but then the most important thing at the end is, write it up as a 1-pager or a 2-pager or something like that, and then share it with each other. Do you want to give that a crack? So we can just go anywhere here really, because the thing's quite good at hearing someone close by. I'll go with you, Tom, if you want. Who doesn't have that would need to partner up with someone? I know this is a bit gimmicky, but I think just like the forcing mechanism of doing this is really, really useful. So the technique, introduce yourself. You've got to be short and sharp, and the thing is short and sharp. This is me. Want your help. We're just talking about what we've achieved this year. Want you to help us capture that information and then write up a summary for each of us at the end of this thing. Yeah?